There it is. Today we are going to be talking about shades, tints, and tones. So I'm going to go ahead and use this sheet that I have posted it under the documents section for you to use. If you would like to print it out and use it, you can, or you can just make your own on a piece of plain white paper. That would be okay too. Okay, so our first section here is marked shades, and I have 5 spaces for each. Okay, so a shade is when you start with a color, and I'm starting with teal. It's one of my favorite colors, and you're just going to put some in a little pile. I happen to have a palette. If you have a palette, that would be great. If you don't really need one. You can use a paper plate as well, or whatever else you happen to have. If you don't have paints, you can do this with crayons or colored pencils. The effect won't be as great as it is with paint, but it'll still give you the right idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my teal, my color or my hue. I'm going to just add, I'm going to show you this. I'm just adding a teeny tiny bit of black to it. And I'm going to add it to the whole cup of teal that I have there. Mix that up really well. And once you're done mixing it all together, you can go ahead and paint that first section. Now, I'm not going to paint everything in exactly because I don't want this video to be too long for you. But when you're painting, I'd like you to make sure that you paint in the whole section. Now, a shade, you're going to make it darker and darker and darker. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep adding a little bit of black to the entire cup. I want to do that because you want to make it darker and darker and darker. So you can see that's a little bit darker. I'm going to add a little bit more black. You should be able to see a difference in the colors. Add a little bit more black. And those are pretty similar, those two, so I'm just going to add a teeny bit more so I get a little bit of a darker shade of that teal. And then the very last box, you're going to have be the darkest shade. Now this is almost looking totally like black there. Okay? Once you're done with your shades, if you are painting, you are going to want to rinse your brush out really well. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Now if you do rinse your brush out, make sure that you squeeze any extra water out of there so you don't end up making your paint too watery. Now with shades, we started with a lot of the color and added a little bit of black as we went along. With tints, we're going to start with mostly white. So I'm going to take my white and put it in one of my cups in my palette. So I don't know if you remember when we've talked about colors before in color mixing, you always have a little teeny bit of the dark and a lot of the light color. So in this case, the white is the light, so we have a lot of the white. And I'm going to go ahead and just add a little bit of that teal to it. It's just going to change it just a little bit, mixing it up with the whole cup of white that I have. Again, I'm just going to paint this very quickly. If you're using crayons or colored pencils, you can go ahead and just add a very, very light touch of whatever color you happen to be using. You don't have to use teal, you can use whatever you want. My next one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to keep adding a little bit of my color. So, unlike the shades, I was adding a little bit of black. This one I'm adding a little bit of color. Now those look pretty similar, so I think I need to add a little bit more color to that. So I can go ahead and do that. I want to make sure that they're a little bit different, right? So our tints should be getting darker as we go along, just like our shades did. Add more to that. So it's getting darker and darker and darker. Again, I'm kind of just painting it quickly. But I'd like you guys to make sure you're painting the whole space in. And then finally for my last box, I'm going to add a little bit more. And that should be our darkest tint. I tell kids too, an easy way to remember, or I think it helps a little bit at least, between the difference between tints and shades. If you close the shades in your house on the windows, it makes it darker in the room. Also, you can think of shades, some people call sunglasses shades, so that makes it darker. So you can see we're going from light to dark. Okay, so now that we're done with that, we're going to move on to our tones. Now tones are a little bit different. Tones, you're going to be adding a combination of the black and the white, so you're going to be adding gray. So gray is going to be the lighter color. So I need to start with the lighter color. So in this case, I'm going to add a lot of white and just a little bit of black to make that nice gray color. Now there's a couple of different ways you can do this. I can just start with this base of gray and make my tone by adding just a little bit of the color. And again, my color is teal. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the first rectangle here. Well, that didn't change very much, so I'm just going to add a little bit more. It's better to add a little bit at a time and have to add more than adding too much, because once you add too much, you can't really take it away. It's much harder to fix it that way. So this still looks pretty gray. And I said there was two ways to do it. You can just add a little bit more of your color to it, or you can add more color and a little bit of black to make that gray a little bit darker. I'm just going to add the color to mine. So you can tell this is a much more solid color. So that's getting a little bit more teal as I'm moving along here. And that's pretty close, but you could still see a little bit of a difference there. I'm going to add a little bit more. Mix it up. And then finally for my last box, I'm going to add a little bit more. And that will do it. So as you can see, it's pretty simple to create the shades, tints, and tones, but you just have to remember to add a little bit at a time. Just add a little bit of paint at a time. So again, the shades, you're going to start with your color and add a little bit of black until it gets darker and darker. For tints, you're going to start with the white and you're going to add a little bit of your color. And for the tones, you're going to start with a gray and add a little bit of color, or you could start with the gray and add a little bit of color plus a little bit of black if you would like. Remember to wash your brushes in between if you are using paint. And again, if you're using crayons or colored pencils, you would do the same thing, but there's going to be a lot more coloring you're going to have to do because you would have to start with gray for each box, and then you would add a little bit of your color on top of it, press a little bit harder, 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 so you get more of that color to come out. Okay, I hope this helped you guys out, and I can't wait to see what you did.